Thank you for joining me here on WCNC Plus. I'm Vanessa Rufus. Right now, we are in the final countdown to the 2024 election. As candidates look to gain the votes of those who have not yet cast their ballots, you've probably seen political campaign signs just about everywhere you go. Some of you have asked us if there are rules about where and when you can place a campaign sign in the Tar Heel State. WCNC Charlotte's Megan Bragg verifies.
People who place political signs along the road hope to sway others to vote for their candidate, but there are some rules you'll need to follow before you place your signs. Let's verify. Our sources are attorney Gary Monty in North Carolina law. Monty says anyone can place a political sign on a state-mandated road. The signs just have to be in compliance with state law.
They have to fit certain size and shape configurations, and so long as they fit within those sizes and shapes, they're okay.
But Monty says there is a time limit in which you can place your signs outside.
Basically, the time frame where on a state-maintained road, a state road, you can put political signs is 30 days before the start of early voting.
But if you're looking to display a sign in Mecklenburg County, Monty says the rules are a little more strict.
Our ordinance here in Charlotte says that signs cannot be placed within 11 feet of the edge of pavement, can't be placed in medians, can't be placed in traffic islands, utility poles, sidewalks, things like that. There's a very specific ordinance.
Monty says people are allowed to keep up political signs up to 30 days after the election. After that date, he says anyone can start taking down those signs. But before that,
and it's a crime if somebody removes it.
With your Verify, I'm Megan Bragg.
One sign at voting locations across North Carolina is causing a stir. Advocacy groups are calling for some Spanish language voting signs to be removed. They say the signs are intimidating and could turn eligible voters away. Here's WCNC Charlotte's Jesse Pierre.
Now, this is the sign, the one here in yellow, that is in question, and they have been placed in polling sites across the state. And several advocacy groups want them removed, saying these signs are exclusively in Spanish, threaten and target Latino voters. Political signs at polling sites, not uncommon.
Most polling sites, do allow signs and do allow electioneering.
This one in particular is causing a stir.
So just to be clear, the signs are only in Spanish. And so we had gotten a number of reports of people seeing these signs and feeling like they could be intimidating.
It translates to say, warning, if you are not a citizen of the United States of America, you cannot vote in elections. It is illegal. It is a crime. You could be deported. Don't do it. Paid for by North Carolina Election Integrity Team.
I think a lot of people perhaps don't realize how much fear there already is in the Latino community about voting by people who are eligible to vote.
About 24 advocacy groups, including Kathleen Robles with Forward Justice, say this signage is targeting and could deter Latino voters.
They may come from a mixed status household where, say, their parents are undocumented, and they want to make sure that nothing is done that could be putting their undocumented family members in danger.
This letter has been sent to the North Carolina State Board of Elections requesting the signs to be removed. The North Carolina Election Integrity Team created the signs. Their president, Jim Womack, says they are not meant to threaten, only to inform.
It's a felony to knowingly vote in an election when you're not eligible to vote. It's a felony. And in order to help prevent non-citizens from committing a crime, we thought it would be appropriate to put signs out at those locations so that they're cautioned.
The North Carolina State Board of Elections sent a statement saying, in part, these signs accurately state the law. Without evidence that eligible voters are misunderstanding these signs, there is no authority for an election official to remove them from a voting site. In North Carolina, we welcome all eligible voters to cast their ballot in this important general election, no matter what language they speak. So for now, the signs remain.
The race for North Carolina Attorney General is shaping up to be one of the most competitive and expensive in state history. The position holds an immense amount of power and represents all government and department agencies. It also provides legal opinions to the governor and the General Assembly. Flashpoint anchor Ben Thompson sat down with both major candidates running for the office this November. Here's his conversation with Representative Dan Bishop.
Congressman Bishop, thanks for coming on Flashpoint. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Ben. Thanks for letting me be with you.
All right, right off the bat, what's the first thing you do if elected?
Restore a tight collaboration between the Attorney General and his office, the top law enforcement agency, and the law enforcement leadership around the state, the district attorneys, the sheriffs, and other municipal law enforcement leaders. That has atrophied in a way that I did not even understand the depth of when I decided to run for Attorney General. I am the candidate of law and order. I am the candidate of law enforcement. More than 75 sheriffs and district attorneys across North Carolina endorsed my candidacy. My opponent hasn't announced any law enforcement endorsements. And so that's what it's all about. That's the first and top priority, so that we can restore the effectiveness of the criminal justice system in North Carolina and people can feel safe and feel that their families are safe.
I assume that would lead to the next priority for you, and I would assume that would, tell me if I'm wrong, tackling crime, because crime is a big problem, especially in our bigger cities.
Absolutely right. Crime is at sustained 10-year highs. You hear a lot of debate out there whether somebody's, that crime has turned the corner, it's ticked down, but it remains, homicides and rapes are over 70% higher than a decade ago. In North Carolina, new stats are out from the SBI 2023, and that is the case. And each of the major cities continues to see crime increases that are disturbing, including my hometown of Charlotte, where the recent stats indicate homicides up about another 30%. Juvenile crime out of control, the police chief says.
What do you do about fentanyl?
Fentanyl is, my opponent in this race says he's going to take on fentanyl because he's going to use a new money laundering statute the General Assembly passed, which is absurd. First of all, the Attorney General doesn't do the prosecuting, the DAs do. But also, a little statute to let you get at a particular aspect of drug pushers is not changing the situation. The situation we have with fentanyl is a byproduct. It doesn't happen by coincidence or fluke. It's a result of the nation's borders being eradicated in practical effect. And we've made the United States government the logistics arm of the international drug cartels. And that's got to change. So you've got to...
That's a big job for a North Carolina Attorney General to tackle.
And so here's what, you can't do the whole job from any office. That's got to get, the federal immigration law has to be enforced by the administration, and hopefully it'll be Donald Trump and his folks. But and attorneys general have had, some have done some efforts nationally to litigate to try to restore some of the policy that the Congress has required and the administration has avoided. But ultimately, what I can do as Attorney General on fentanyl, assuming we resume enforcing our borders, is to urge and ultimately enforce cooperation between North Carolina's law enforcement sheriffs and the mechanics of the machinery of federal immigration law enforcement.
I'm going to get back to some of the issues in just a second, but it does strike me, and I'm interested in your take. We've elected governors statewide, U.S. Senate. We now have 2 U.S. senators that are Republicans, Supreme Court. For some reason, the Attorney General job has evaded Republicans. I think the last one was elected more than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Over the last 2 cycles, Democrats blew out the Republican opponent in spending. The last Republican nominee was outspent 25-1 and only lost by 0.2%. One reason I've left Congress voluntarily when I had a safe seat I could retain was because I believed I could make that change, and we have. We're not at parity, but we have ample resources to be heard.
You've touched on some of those national issues like the border. I believe you told the Observer that you would be looking to challenge any what you'd call legally dubious national decisions. Now, some people might hear that and they might think you're going to pull the state into these high-profile, political issues that the state doesn't necessarily be involved in. I assume you don't see it that way.
I don't see it that way at all. In fact, what I think we've seen increasingly, and another factor that has drawn me to, what I've said so far is that my top priority is criminal justice system operating, functioning efficiently. Frankly, it's a centrist idea. It's not, my opponent says I'm an extremist, but that is centrism. The rest of it, the rest of the picture is likewise, I think, centrist. Our law is not a function that the legal officer of the state, the attorney general, his obligation is to the law, not picking and choosing which laws, not articulating policy positions and then taking an antagonistic position as a counterweight to the elected legislature. That is actually undermines our constitutional system. The Attorney General, his sole responsibility is to pursue the law, to defend the law of his state and the people through the law. And I think that's the opposite of the ideological manipulation of law that I believe has been in the hands of attorneys general like Letitia James of New York, who did something unprecedented in American history when she ran for a position clothed with prosecutorial or investigative authority and vowed that she would use that authority to target a particularly despised political enemy. Now, a lot of people may despise that political enemy I'm describing,
yes,
but that phenomenon ought to concern everyone.
But see, you're talking about something. I was on a panel a few weeks ago with some folks, and we talked about the over-nationalization of our politics. And
yes.
But it seems like you're talking about that, and you're talking about a New York Attorney General when...
Oh, the nationalization, as if
yeah.
it's a... Well, what I think I'm describing
when
is
there's
not...
local issues here that...
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's certainly true. Maybe what you're getting at is, should the Attorney General stay out of national fights?
Yeah.
And I don't know that... I don't think so necessarily.
Okay.
I think, and right before we went on, we were talking about Congress sort of being stuck and stagnated. One function of Congress being sort of in a stalemate for so long is that federal power has been exercised through administrative agency rulemaking. They make law in the bureaucracies. That also is, frankly, something of a corruption of the way our system's supposed to work, where Congress is supposed to make the law. But as they've been more and more bodacious, aggressive in doing that, state attorneys general have appeared as a national force in litigation to stop or to control that in order to protect the rights and freedoms of their own people. That is an appropriate role for the attorney general, in my view. It ought to be designed to function in terms of where the law is, not to take on people, not pick and choose among the law to suit one's ideological objectives.
One final question. Critics say you want to ban abortion. I don't think that's capable of the Attorney General role as it currently is in the state constitution. But I do think it's a fair question because you're going to have a conservative state Supreme Court. You've got a conservative General Assembly, maybe even a supermajority still. I do think it's fair to ask your stance. Do you support the current 12-week ban as it stands in North Carolina?
This is extremely important, and it's consistent with every answer I've given in this conversation so far. The role of the Attorney General is to respect and enforce all law. So that would include the legislature's choice to do that 12-week position. I will not, and I cannot conceive of any way an appropriately operating Attorney General could change that. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't think it's appropriate for the Attorney General to go attack the law or to invite partisan plaintiffs to come in to do friendly litigation to try to change the law. That's the wrong approach to the Attorney General's office. I will abide the law. I will not be a policy maker. The policy makers are the legislators, and people should elect who they want to the legislature.
Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Good to be with you, Ben.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
Dan Bishop faces Democrat Jeff Jackson in the closely contested race. Here's his conversation with Flashpoint anchor Ben Thompson.
Congressman Jackson, welcome back to Flashpoint. Good to see you as always.
Good to see you.
All right, so Attorney General, important role here in the state of North Carolina. What would you say is your biggest priority?
Biggest priority, the day one priority, has to be fentanyl. We're losing an average of 9 people a day in our state. It's this big problem. Supply and demand are the two big pieces. Supply side, break up the distribution cells that exist within our state. General Assembly just passed an anti-money laundering law. We were a state that didn't have one. We'll be very helpful in working with federal law enforcement to break apart those distribution cells.
I actually just read on our morning news about overdose deaths are trending in a better direction than they were, still not back to where they were before the pandemic. Is there any reason for optimism there?
Yeah, so that's actually the demand side. The demand side means addiction. We have gotten smarter with treating addiction. We've got Narcan out there, which helps reverse overdoses, but we've also just done a good job of treating addiction. The folks who are using fentanyl, they're not using it to get high. They haven't gotten high in years. They're using to stave off withdrawal, and the way you treat that is medicated assisted treatment. About a third of our counties are regularly doing that, saving a lot of lives.
I want to talk about crime. Youth crime specifically is a big problem. Republicans will be the first one to say Democrats are to blame, whether it's Democrats leading big cities like Charlotte or mind you. As the state's top law enforcement officer, what do you see as the Attorney General's role?
Well, first of all, I'm a former prosecutor. I'm the only one in this race who has ever prosecuted a case. I've worked with law enforcement. I have worked with victims. I know what modern effective prosecution looks like. The Attorney General's role, first and foremost, be a champion for law enforcement. Make sure they are fully funded. I would champion a raise for law enforcement across the state to the General Assembly. Also, we need to make sure that judges have the discretion to keep people safe. Juveniles, you don't want them treated the same way as adults. You don't want them lumped together, but you do want to make sure that judges can say, hey, there's a particular risk here, and we're going to keep this kid off the streets in order to keep people safe. They should have that discretion.
Your opponent, Dan Bishop, touts the endorsements of a lot of law enforcement agencies. You talk about supporting them. Why don't you feel like you have some of the endorsements that he got?
I think I've got a lot of endorsements. I've got a lot of endorsements that he doesn't have. Just got endorsed by News and Observer, Charlotte Observer, Herald Sun. So I'll make my best case to law enforcement, ask them to support me as the only person who has ever worked with law enforcement and actually prosecuted a case. Part
of the job is getting ahead of crime trends and what we're seeing, and part of that is cracking down on scammers and specifically artificial intelligence. How do you do that? Stay one step ahead of some of those fraudsters.
Okay, you're absolutely right about that because this is a tidal wave that's coming. I'm specifically concerned about the effect of voice duplication technology. We know that senior citizens are the most likely group to get targeted here. We have a window of time in which to get ahead of it. I would go to the General Assembly. I need you to give me some new tools. What you need is to establish a reputation as a state for being very hostile to that type of predator in order to keep them away.
General Assembly, you mentioned the state recently passed that anti-money laundering law. This would be a new tool in the toolbox for an attorney general, whoever it is. How can you use that? And for folks at home, what does it really mean?
So it goes into effect this December. I would be the first attorney general who has access to it. One of the things it means is it makes it easier to do joint investigations with federal law enforcement. We have very active U.S. attorneys here in North Carolina. They have made a priority of fentanyl. It's going to make it easier to work with them, but also make it easier not just to bust low-level dealers. That's not really what we need to do. We need to move up the chain in the investigation to the folks running the distribution cells that operate within our state.
You talked about the General Assembly. As you know, it's Republican dominated, something that our current Attorney General has had to reconcile. How do you reconcile enforcing the laws that they pass when in some cases, as you know, you might not agree with them?
There's no reconciling. The job of Attorney General is to do that. You are the people's lawyer, but you are also the lawyer for the state, which means it would be my duty to represent the General Assembly or state agencies, even if I personally disagreed with them. And people should know going in, that is just the job of Attorney General.
You talk about supporting law enforcement in the state, especially when you talk about crime and how it spiked in some places. How do you view an AG's role in doing just that?
Addressing crime that has spiked.
Supporting law enforcement agencies.
I'll give you a specific way the AG could support law enforcement. When people think of state law enforcement, they usually think of state highway patrol. We've got a lot of different types.
Much bigger than that, yeah.
Much bigger than that. DMV Theft Bureau would be an example. We clearly have a problem with auto theft. Their pay isn't standardized. It's variable. So some of them get a raise and some of them don't. I would be a champion for standardizing that pay to give all of them a raise.
A big issue for you before even this race, going back to your career in the state Senate, and even now in Congress, is gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Knowing the Attorney General, that's not really the purview of the Attorney General. Is that still going to be a case? Because I talk about it on this show. It's the least sexy topic, but the most important one, arguably, that people just don't totally get, because it's honestly, it's hard to explain on TV in a way that makes people understand it. What are you going to do about it?
Let me see if I can explain it on TV in a way that people will understand it, okay? If you let politicians draw their own districts, they will cheat. My party, when they were in power, they cheated. Now the other party is in power, and they're cheating. And the people who lose are voters, because what they're deprived of is competitive elections. I'm in a very competitive election right now, because it's the whole state. And you can't redraw the map of the state for the election. But if you can draw your own map for the General Assembly or Congress, they will make it so that they don't have to worry about the voters. That's wrong.
And you found yourself the quote unquote victim of this in your congressional district, because after they've been fairly evenly split because of a judge ruling, Republicans in the General Assembly went back and sort of renumbered the congressional delegation.
I wouldn't say that I was the victim, because voters are the victim, but I was on the receiving end of
receiving end. That's right. That's right. So you've seen it firsthand, but it presented you this opportunity for the Attorney General job.
Look, I went to law school to become a prosecutor. I worked there for several years, did a lot of serious cases. I consider running for Attorney General as an extension of my career as a prosecutor.
All right, Congressman Jeff Jackson. Congressman, thanks.
Thank you.
Good to see you as always.
Good to see you.
Best of luck on the campaign trail.
When you go to cast your vote this presidential election, you're not really voting for the candidate. You're voting to help choose electors in the Electoral College. WCNC Charlotte anchor Colin Mayfield explains how this all works.
Why does the United States use the Electoral College to pick the president? The founding fathers were split. Should Congress choose the president, or should it be left to the people? The use of electors was the solution. When you cast your vote for president, you're deciding which electors will represent your state. The number of electors in each state is determined by how many seats are in Congress that state has, and that number is based on the state's population. So, for example, let's look at California. Every state has 2 senators, so right off the bat, there's 2 electors. California is the most populous state and has 52 representatives in the House, so the Golden State gets 54 total electors. Whichever candidate wins, California will get all 54 electoral votes. There are 538 total electoral votes, 535 for the states, and 3 for the District of Columbia. 48 states are winner-take-all. Maine and Nebraska give 2 electoral votes to the statewide winner and 1 for the winner of each congressional district. A simple majority of 270 electoral votes is needed to win. If neither candidate gets 270, the House of Representatives will determine the president. But each state delegation, regardless of the number of electors, must vote as one. So there are only 50 votes up for grabs. The Senate will determine the vice president with a simple majority vote of all 100 senators. The popular vote winner has lost the Electoral College in 2 of the last 6 elections, and that has prompted calls to switch the popular vote system, but that requires a constitutional amendment.
As we count down the days until Decision 2024, we want to make sure you're prepared to cast your vote. Text the word election to 704-329-3600 and we'll send our 2024 election guide right to your phone. And don't forget to join us right here on WCNC Plus on election night. We'll have live coverage starting at 7 p.m. when those polls close. Our team of reporters and experts will be breaking down the races as results come in across the Carolinas. I'm Vanessa Rufus. Thanks for joining us here on WCNC Plus. The news continues right now.